A man who'd known to have had several mistresses and girlfriends in the past, and that her star would wane, and at a certain point she'd probably go back to nice dull Mr. Simpson with a few jewels to her credit. I think Mr. Simpson wasn't so convinced that that was likely to happen, but it's interesting to think that she never thought that it would go much further. Had he stayed as king, some people suggest that he might have got away with marrying her at a later date. I'm not so sure that he could have done on account of the coronation oath and various other things. I think that they put forward a pretty strong case against this marriage. But it might have been that if he had established himself as king for a few more years, perhaps quietly married her, as some other kings in history have done, particularly abroad, he might have got away with it. But this is one of the big ifs of history. I think probably that it all turned out for the best. Except maybe for the Windsors themselves. I'm not sure whether the life that they later on led will have made them particularly happy. I think that it's good advice to give any young people that if you have to make the choice between duty and happiness, choose duty, because it'll always make you much happier in the long run. And they did the opposite.
She commanded a respect similar. I think she was perhaps supplanted by Jacqueline Kennedy, but nothing was said against her. Her appearance at a party ensured enormous attendance. You had to see what she was wearing. Her lipstick was copied. Her nail polish was copied.
I was very lucky to go over to the Duke of Windsor's house in 1972, shortly before he died, to see his private secretary, and somehow got tangled up in this story and got fascinated by both of them. I was already very, very interested. I'd read their memoirs and so forth. But very soon after that, the Duke died, and then the Duchess fell ill, and nobody quite knew what was going on. The awful Maître Plume sort of moved in and took control. And I kind of lived through all those years, talking to the private secretaries and hearing various conflicting stories about what was really happening and so forth. And then some years later, the Duchess's personal secretary, was a Swiss girl, a little bit older than me, she said to me, really, you should write this story and I will help you. And the main story I was writing was about what happened to the Duchess after the Duke died, when she fell into the hands of her lawyer. But also to have another look at who was the Duchess, and what was she really like, and what was she up to? Was she really the woman who stole the king? Was she a victim, or was she a villain? And I think in the end she was a victim. And it's been very interesting in these last months, since the book came out in London last April, going around and talking about her to audiences who you would think on the whole would be quite unsympathetic and had certainly been brought up to dislike the whole idea of her. They have begun to consider her in a different light, which has been very pleasing, and I think is fair and correct. I think if you're looking for a villain, unfortunately it's him, not her.
I think she certainly, I think we might call her a gold digger, and or, socially, she had her sights set very high. She set them very high.
Of course, the kings and queens of England have traditionally been buried at Westminster Abbey and various other places. And since George III built the Royal Vault in St. George's Chapel, St. George's Chapel, Windsor, has by and large been the place where the kings and queens of England are buried. There are 11 kings in St. George's Chapel, including King George V of Hanover, who was a cousin of Queen Victoria's. Queen Victoria herself built a mausoleum at Frogmore, which is in the grounds of the castle, if you like, the home park. Edward VIII did not know where, the Duke of Windsor didn't know where he was going to be buried. He contemplated being buried in France. I think I'm right in saying that James II is buried in France, and I think he thought for a time that he might be buried there. But he also decided at one point to buy a plot in Baltimore in Greenmount Cemetery, and he got his friend Clarence Miles to investigate this and to purchase this plot, and that was going to be another alternative. Actually, as early as 1961, it was decided that he would be buried at Frogmore, where since 1928 there's been a private royal family burial ground, which is where his brother, the Duke of Kent, was buried, and he actually in 1968 attended the burial of Princess Marina, and this very much crystallized his wish to be buried there. But of course there was one very important stipulation, which was that the Duchess of Windsor should be buried with him at his side.
As much as she was the girl from Baltimore, she was the girl who had made it from Baltimore, and she made it enormously. And I think people smiled a bit when they saw her, because they knew she had taken chances and she was daring and she had pulled it off.